Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm recording my wrap-up for the month of July. In the month of July, I completed 10 books, which sounds really impressive, except for that I was almost done with one of them at the beginning of the month. 2 were manga and 1 was a middle grade that was only like 100 pages long. So that gives you like 4 of the 10 books that were pretty short or already almost complete. I also have 3 books that I was in the progress of reading, 2 that I started in July, 1 that I started in June, that are also carrying over into the month of August. If you saw my August TBR, you already know about them, but I'm gonna go ahead and mention them here just in case you didn't catch that. So, the big boy on the list that I have been reading since June is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. At the time of this video, I have about 300 pages left, so I will definitely be finishing this in August, thank goodness. I'm really enjoying it. I have enjoyed pretty much all of this book, but there was a point where I kind of wasn't in the mood for it, and I just put it down for a while, so I'm way behind a lot of other people, but I should still finish by the end of the month. Another book that I am working on is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Only about 300 pages into this 1,000-page book, so I still have a lot of this to go. And lastly, another book that I am in the progress of reading is Emma by Jane Austen. I know Jane Austen July is over, but we're doing Jane Austen August for myself. I am buddy reading this book with Cristo from Dostoevsky in Space, Evie from She Was Only Evie, Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, and Kate from The Literary Apothecary. This is what we decided to read after we finished A Bad Business, the short story collection by Dostoevsky. So I'm only 4 chapters into this one. This one is not one that I have gotten very far in, but this is a carryover as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into the books that I actually completed in the month of July. I am going in ascending star order, so I'm starting with the lowest star rating all the way up to 5 stars. Out of the books that I completed this month, 6 of them were 5 stars, which is a pretty good reading month, that out of 10 books, 6 were 5 stars. I'm also gonna go ahead and update you on my bingo board, which has apparently seen better days. Like, my cat got a hold of that. As you can see, I did actually get a bingo this month, but only one. I'm really close to getting one here, and then once I have that one, I'll be close to this one. I'm already close to this one. This one's gonna be for the Count of Monte Cristo. So yeah, so I'm doing pretty well. There are 8 spaces left on the bingo board that I haven't filled, but 3 of them I'm already reading books that will fulfill those prompts. Okay, so let's start with the lowest rated book on this month's completed books. This I used for the middle grade square, and that is The Black Pearl by Scott O'Dell. I actually read this during a reading vlog, so I'll go ahead and link that. You can watch that if you haven't. I actually read 4 books in that reading vlog, I think. So there's a lot of more in-depth thoughts on books, but anyways, this is for my Read or Read project, and I also used it for Books and Lala's prompt of an item in the title. This book was just incredibly lackluster all around, to be totally honest. It was weird. So it's about this boy whose father is like a pearl diver or something. And so he really wants to become a pearl diver as well. I think he's like 16 or 17 at the beginning of the book, but he reads much younger because it's a middle grade book. So the age just seems really weird. There's also this insistence that now he's a man, even though he's acting like he's like a 10-year-old, and he does not look older on this cover. And like, he gets this pearl and bad things happen, and it's really strange, and I was very disappointed in it, and so I gave it 2 stars. Next up is a manga, which I used for the prompt of a library book, and that's Snow White with the Red Hair. This is volume 1, and again, just super underwhelmed with it. Didn't love some of the art style choices. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. It's like things will be happening on the page, and it's showing all these things at the same time, that they're facing each other, but then this person's foot is going forward and the sword is coming out, like all at the same time. And I felt like that made it like kind of confusing for me to follow and harder for me to visualize the scene, which it's a graphic novel. It should be pretty easy to visualize the scene. Not graphic novel, manga. You know what I meant. And the storyline, I just didn't care. It wasn't really anything like Snow White at all, except that she sent a poisoned apple at the beginning. And that's pretty much it. That's the only similarity. And I was expecting a fairy tale retelling. So, I mean, I don't know. It was just like, meh. I think I gave it 3 stars because I want to allow for the fact that it could have been just me not liking it as much, but my enjoyment probably would have been maybe less than 3 stars. Up next, I have another book that I think I gave maybe like 3.5 stars to, and that's A Betrayal in Winter by Daniel Abraham. This is book 2 of the Long Price Quartet. I read A Shadow in Summer and loved it. It was like very slow in its pacing, but it established the world really well. It was just really fascinating. And to be honest, I actually do miss this world even after reading the second book. The second book takes place, I think, like 10 or 15 years after the first book. And we're following quite a few of the same characters, well, 2 of the same main characters anyway, and kind of the consequences of their actions at the end of the last book, and where are they now, and how have those actions affected what's going on with them now. And so it was interesting, and we're in a totally different city in this world as well, so culturally and weather-wise, it's very different from the first book. I just had a hard time getting into it, to be honest. I really, really didn't like one of the main perspectives at all. I was so annoyed with her, and I just feel like I get annoyed with all the women in Daniel Abraham's books so far, with the exception of one. I didn't like any of the females in the first book, and I didn't like any of the females in this book that were introduced. I am still going to continue with the series, but this book, I struggled with it. And I know that it's part of a larger whole, and I really like the world, and everyone has told me the payoff was so good in reading it that like they went back and rated the books that they didn't rate 5 stars 5 stars because it was so good. So I am planning on continuing with the series, but honestly, I just struggled to even want to read this. It was like, it was sloggy for me, which is weird because I feel like book 1 was more slower paced than this, but I was riveted with book 1, and this one, I just wasn't. And I think it was because I downright hated one of the main characters and just wanted to punch her the whole time. Next up is a book that I'm pretty sure I rated 4 stars on Goodreads, but I think I would drop that reading now a couple weeks later, and that's The Red Palace by June Her. I think I would drop it to 3 stars or maybe 3.5. So it's not like I would drastically drop it or anything. I just have found it kind of forgettable over time. And to be fair, I did finish this towards the beginning of the month. But still, when you read a book that really is memorable, you can remember it even weeks or months later. But this is a really interesting setting, and that is something that I really feel like it had going for it. So it is about a young girl who is essentially a bastard. So her mother was kind of his mistress of a nobleman, and so this girl doesn't have the opportunity afforded to her if she was actually a legitimate child of this nobleman, which is unfortunate. So she does the best that she can. She works really hard to be able to become a nurse, and the higher up that she goes in her education, the further she can go as a nurse. So she actually becomes a nurse at the palace, which is the highest position that she could hope to achieve. Right after she starts working at the palace, all of a sudden there is this murder, and she's kind of pulled into it and pulled into secrecy by the wife of the crown prince, who is kind of a suspected culprit. And so she ends up running into this young police chief, and they start deciding that they're gonna solve this together. He decides to include her in his investigations and everything, and it goes from there. So the setting's really interesting because it does take place in Korea. I can't remember exactly when. 1758. So it's a very, very interesting time period. And that's what I loved about this book, is I loved the Korean culture that's in here. There's Korean words in here. There's Korean history in here. And the crown prince in this story was actually legitimately a historical figure. And some of the things that happen in this book that he actually did do in real life. So the author's note was really cool for this as well. Overall, I didn't feel like the characterization was all that deep, and I didn't feel like the mystery was all that memorable either. And so that's why I feel like it's less. It was still a good book. I enjoyed reading it. It is a YA, so there are elements to it that felt very teenagery, especially the romance. But I thought that the historical elements were amazing. It just didn't like long-term click with me, although like I said, I enjoyed it. I'm making it sound like I hated it, and I didn't. I just felt like overall it was kind of forgettable, which is why I would say it would be 3, maybe 3.5 stars, because that's just a book that was okay. It was fine, but not something that's gonna stick with me. I forgot to mention, I'm already forgetting my summer book bingo. So for Betrayal in Winter was this space here, which was water on the cover. And then the Red Palace was a mystery, which is right here, this space. So every other book that I have sitting over here were all 5 stars. So I'm not really gonna like rank these as to which one were my favorite, because that would take a lot of thought and effort that I don't feel like putting in right now, to be honest. So they were all 5 stars. I enjoyed them all. The one that I probably have the least to say about is Spy Family Volume 2. Just loving this manga series. I just think it's so much fun. I feel like everyone has talked about this recently, so you probably don't need a synopsis, but basically the synopsis is that the main character is a spy and he has to go undercover for this mission, and in order for him to do that, he needs to get married and have a child. So he gets married to this lady and he doesn't realize that she's an assassin. She doesn't know that he's a spy, and the daughter that they adopt is a telepath, and neither of them know that. So she knows what they are and what's going on with them because she can see their thoughts, but they have no idea that she can do that. So in this book, the only thing really that I'm gonna say is the little girl who's right here. I think she's the cutest. Her name's Anya. I just think she's adorable. I love her character so much. She starts school, and that's kind of the main plot of this, because that's part of the main character's spy mission, is that his daughter needs to get into this prestigious school. So that's basically the plot of this one. And it was just a lot of fun, and it made me laugh. But it's really sweet too, because you get little snippets of backstory and you get little family interactions, and she just like loves her parents, her adopted parents, and it's really sweet, the relationship that's forming there. All right, next up is A Bad Business by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a collection of short stories that was recently published by Pushkin Press, so it does have a new translator, and I just loved this entire book. I actually did a video ranking all of the short stories in this collection, so I'll link that if you haven't watched it, so you can go check it out, because it has a lot more thoughts about the stories in general. Because there's 6 stories, I'm not really going to go into detail with the stories because I already did in that video, but it is spoiler free, so you can watch it without being spoiled for any of these stories. But these are just, I was so surprised at how funny so many of the stories in here are. Dostoevsky writes humor and drama really, really well, but I was not expecting there to be like just hilarity and some absurd things in some of these stories. I just really wasn't expecting. And when I think of Dostoevsky, I think of some top tier hilarious drama at the beginning, but it pretty much always ends tragically, and there's usually a lot of philosophizing in the middle. And maybe it's because these are short stories, they did not always follow that format. There's definitely not as much philosophy in here, although there is still some deep examination of psychology and some pondering and some questions that are happening here, but it's on a much smaller scale. So if you've been interested in Russian literature and you're intimidated, or interested in Dostoevsky and you're intimidated, this is an excellent place to start, because I think it's a good introduction to his writing style, to his humor, and not every story in here is funny. 2 of them are quite tragic actually, but it's just a good, I feel like it's a good starting place for Dostoevsky, and I loved pretty much every second of reading this book. It was just a lot of fun, and I wasn't expecting it to be quite as fun as it ended up being. Next up on this 5-star list is Persuasion by Jane Austen. I buddy read this with Dia from Novel Idea, and also a subscriber buddy, Alyssa. So the 3 of us read this book together for Jane Austen July, and when I decided I was going to read it, I had no idea that there was an adaptation coming out for it, and I haven't watched it, And I don't think I will, because I have only heard terrible, terrible, terrible things about it. And so I think I'm just gonna leave that one alone. Anyways, I had read Persuasion before, but I read it in high school and I remembered zero things about it. So it was like reading it for the first time, because as I was reading it wasn't like things were clicking into place. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. No, that didn't even happen one time. So it was basically like I was reading this story for the first time. This is Jane Austen's last completed novel, and you can tell the difference in the writing style and in the characterization, because I read Northanger Abbey last summer, which I believe was published posthumously, but she wrote it when she was young. It was the first of her novels that she completed. And the characterization is very different, and the nuance in the characters is very different. Now, I feel like Northanger Abbey, it's more caricatures of people than it is like deep dives into people, unlike Persuasion, which I feel like definitely takes some more time with character establishment and all that kind of stuff. So the story is about Anne Elliot and her family. She is the middle of three girls. Her mother passed away when she was, I think, a teenager, and her father is just very focused on status, but also not good with money and spends lots and lots of money. And so as a result, he's now pretty much broke, and they have to rent out their home and go live somewhere cheaper in order to actually have some money. And that's kind of where the story picks up. About, I think, 8 years prior, Anne had been proposed to by Wentworth, who she loved but didn't have the status and money that her family and friends thought that she needed to be happy and be provided for. And so she was talked into breaking off the engagement before we even start this story, so that's not spoilery. And lo and behold, he comes back into her life in a very typical Jane Austen way. It's interesting because all of the characters in the story are older than a lot of other Jane Austen characters and protagonists. So you can tell there's a lot of maturity, not just in Jane Austen's writing, but in the characters themselves. They are older and more mature, so that is an interesting element to the story. I love this story. It had lots of humor. It had people I wanted to punch, people I wanted to laugh at, and all of that kind of stuff. I watched a video after reading this by Olive at a Book. Olive, she did like this deep dive psychological thing as to why Anne turned Wentworth down the first time that he proposed, and kind of like the psychology of all three sisters and how losing their mother young affected them and their personalities. And I thought it was so fascinating and amazing. So I'm gonna link that video down below so that way you can watch it. It's not a newer video. It came out like probably like 6 months ago or something like that. But if you like Persuasion and have read Persuasion, even if you don't like Persuasion, but you've read it or you were kind of like annoyed with some of the characters, her breakdown of character psychology is so interesting, and it made me feel a lot more compassionate towards characters that I was super annoyed with up until that point. Moving on, another 5-star book is The Edge of Belonging by Amanda Cox. This book actually fulfilled the prompt of a journey or vacation, and I used journey very loosely in this sense, although the main character does journey from her home back to her childhood home, but even more so, I feel like she takes like an emotional journey, as does every single character in this book. This book was, I think, Chantel's favorite book last year from Chantel Reads All Day, or one of her favorites anyway. And it's a Christian fiction, and I am leery of Christian fiction, to be totally honest. I find a lot of the plots very formulaic, and I find the spirituality in a lot of them either to be so forced and heavy-handed that it feels incredibly preachy, or not there at all. Just says that someone prays at some point or something. So that way they can label it a Christian book, but it's basically just a clean story. This was neither of those. It was like the happy medium. There was a lot of spirituality in this, but also just so wonderful in so many ways. This was also part of the reading vlog where I read Snow White with Red Hair, and I talked a lot about this book and shared a lot of quotes that I really liked. So again, that video is linked. So this is also a dual timeline. It follows this girl, Ivy Rose, in the present day, and she is an adult. Her grandmother has just passed away, and her grandmother has some kind of secrets surrounding Ivy Rose's adoption, and she wants Ivy Rose to know the truth. Then we have a past timeline, which is also Ivy's timeline, although she doesn't remember it. It's her as a baby. There is this man who is a homeless man who finds her abandoned on the side of the road and just decides he's gonna take care of her and take her in so she doesn't feel the same abandonment and pain that he felt growing up in the foster care system. So there's a lot of intersecting between the two storylines because they are both Ivy's story. Her story as a baby, her story of being discovered and being raised, being adopted, and then Ivy as an adult kind of unpacking the emotional trauma that she has had in her life and the uncertainty that she's felt from being adopted and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm not normally a huge fan of dual timelines, but because this follows the same people, that made it so much better. A lot of historical fictions tend to have a timeline that was set hundreds of years ago and then a present day one. And usually they feel more like two different stories, or one of them feels completely superfluous and they don't really connect in a way that's super meaningful for me a lot of the times when I read those books. There are exceptions, but overall, dual timeline is just not my favorite. But this is dual timeline done in a way that makes sense to me. So I really enjoyed this book. I loved pretty much everything about it. So again, if you want more thoughts, you can watch the reading vlog because I went on and on about all the things that I liked about this. Forgot to mention also that Persuasion was for flowers on the cover, which is a space here. And this was the row I got bingo on. And actually, I just realized that Spy Family Volume 2 was Summer Vibes, and I didn't put a sticker there. I ran out of butterfly stickers, so I'm using an actual bug instead. Spy Family gets a fly. And that means I'm actually closer to a bingo and I have less open spaces than I thought I did at the beginning of this video, so that's cool. All right, almost done. I have two more and they're both nonfictions. First one is The Lord God Made Them All by James Harriott. This is a memoir and it's book 4 in the All Creatures Great and Small series that James Harriott wrote about his life as a country vet in England. And gosh, I just love these books. Every single one of them has been 5 stars, has been super heartwarming, and just, I've loved it so much. This is actually my least favorite of the series so far, but it's still 5-star because it was still so enjoyable. But it was a little weird the way that it was laid out. So most of the stories were about him being a vet in the English countryside. And there's some really sweet and fun stories about his children and them coming along with him on some of his trips. And that was just really fun to have that. And there's still the witty, fun observations about small town life and country living and all that kind of stuff that you come to love and expect in a James Harriott book. But there's also this story that is interspersed throughout where he takes these trips as a vet to accompany these animals. So the first one, he's in a ship that goes to Russia and he's got all these sheep that he's caring for. So he's talking about his time on the ship, the other people on the ship, then he gets to Russia, his experience there, the sheep and the selling of the sheep and all that kind of stuff. And those are in journal format. And then there's another one where he takes a plane ride with these cows to somewhere. I don't even remember where. I'm thinking it's somewhere in the Middle East, but I can't remember, or the Mediterranean, one of the two. I can't remember. But anyways, yeah, so they weren't bad, but they didn't fit as well, especially because they weren't like all at once. So you'd have like one journal entry, then you'd have like 2 chapters of like normal stories in the past, and they're taking place in different times. So you've got like his kids are children in these stories where he's in England being a vet, but when he is writing in this journal, his children are adults. And so there's this weird like 20-year gap of time between the two storylines. And so that made it feel kind of a little disjointed, but I still just loved this book. I still couldn't give it less than 5 stars because just couldn't. I love them so much. These are my ultimate comfort read, and that was actually the spot that this took up on my bingo board, which was a comfort read, because I've never read any other series that brings me as much joy and comfort as this one does. And I was super, super stressed out and feeling overwhelmed with life and feeling overwhelmed with the world and things going on in our country and on the news and just all that kind of stuff was really stressing me out. And then I picked up this book and it was just perfect and so relaxing. Last book that I want to talk about is also a nonfiction, as I said, and I use this for my nonfiction space on my bingo board, and that is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I was buddy reading this with Angie from Literary Labors, but I'm pretty sure that I finished it before she did. This book, you guys, it's amazing. It's so good. I started it in January, but I got it from the library and I didn't finish it before I had to go back. And so I was like, well, I'm going to buy this at some point. And then that point came. It was on sale. And so I ended up buying it from Amazon because I knew it was one that I would end up wanting to read over and over again. And having just finished it a couple days ago, I'm already like, yes, I can't wait to read this again at some point. It makes habit changing so simple and so effective in ways that I have never seen in any other book that I have read about habit changing or self-improvement or any of those kind of things. I just feel like it makes it seem so doable and achievable, and I feel like encouraged to start instead of feeling like overwhelmed and like I can't do it. I'm very much not a type A person, and I think that this would still work for type A people, but I feel like it gives hope to type B people who maybe aren't quite as organized and disciplined and who struggle to really truly change their habits. I feel like this is a great book for that. So I really recommend this one. It gives lots of practical steps. And it's interesting because I didn't really tab or like write any notes in the book, which I typically do with a nonfiction. But there were reflection questions in a lot of these chapters, having you write out your daily schedule of habits to see where you can add things in or see things that you're like, that's a good habit, or that's a bad habit, or that's just kind of a neutral habit. It's just something like kind of happens and doesn't really matter, and labeling those kind of things. And so I did a lot of reflecting while I read this book and also took notes and stuff in a separate notebook. So I love this book so much. I'm so glad I bought it. I'm telling my husband he needs to read it too, because I think that it will really revolutionize his thought process in how he views habits and habit change as well. Well, there you have it. There are my books that I read for the month of July and my bingo board, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to black it out. I have books planned for every space on here except for Own for over a year. But if you watched my TBR video, you'll know that even though I only put 6 books on my TBR, they're all over 500 pages long. So we'll see the kind of progress that I make, but I'm gonna try. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments down below. What have you been reading? What did you really love that you read in July? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.